I knew my 31-year career at Apex Manufacturing was officially over the exact moment Justin Holcomb uttered the word "sir," like it was a subtle corporate insult wrapped in performative sympathy. He did not say it with the genuine professional deference that veteran engineers earn after decades of hard labor. He said it with that polished, condescending tone reserved for an obsolete piece of heavy machinery scheduled for immediate decommissioning. 31 years of blood, sweat, intricate logic diagrams, and solder resin, and now I was being boxed up like expired printer toner. My electronic security badge deactivated itself with a sharp ping before I even reached the second-floor elevators. That was how 3 decades of engineering dedication ended for me. Not with a framed appreciation plaque, not with a respectful handshake from the executive board, but with a sterile electronic beep and the lingering scent of lavender disinfectant on cheap faux mahogany laminate. I turned around to glance at my corner workstation one final time. For 31 long years, that desk had represented a sanctuary of organized industrial chaos. It had been filled with handwritten post-it notes containing complex cryptographic equations, blue-line paper schematics tucked under empty tea mugs, calibration logs dating back to the late 1990s, and a half-empty bag of butterscotch hard candies I never had the heart to throw away. Now the desk was completely barren, stripped of personality except for a framed original schematic resting against the partition. I had drawn that architectural blueprint by hand back when the company was still operating out of founder Harvey Kaplan's modest concrete garage. Long before 32-year-old Justin Holcomb arrived on the scene, Justin had parachuted into the executive floor with his freshly minted Master of Business Administration degree, high-water trousers, spotless white tech bro sneakers, and an unquenchable obsession with Silicon Valley buzzwords. The confrontation inside Justin's glass-walled executive office had been short, sterile, and entirely one-sided. Justin had leaned back in his ergonomic leather chair, tapping casually on his touchscreen tablet while sipping a synthetic vanilla protein shake. He had looked at me as if I were a dusty relic from an archaeological dig. He explained with a practiced corporate smirk that the board had authorized a sweeping structural pivot to replace human legacy thinking with fully automated, artificial intelligence-driven paradigms. He informed me that my traditional methods, manual diagnostic protocols, and hand-drawn schematics represented legacy drag that the company could no longer afford to carry. He handed me a standardized severance agreement, offering 12 weeks of base salary in exchange for signing away all future legal claims against the firm. Justin had paced back and forth across his office floor, gestures wide and dramatic, as if addressing a venture capital pitch panel. He talked about projected return on investment, operational synergy, and quarterly earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. He boasted that under his new corporate vision, human intervention on the assembly lines would be reduced by 80% within 2 financial quarters. He claimed that 54-year-old senior engineers were fundamentally unequipped to grasp the agile speed of modern algorithmic automation. He spoke as though 31 years of practical mechanical experience was a handicap rather than an asset, completely ignoring the fact that algorithms cannot physically tighten a loose hydraulic flange or recalibrate a drifting optical encoder. I sat across from Justin in complete silence, my expression unreadable. I did not raise my voice. I did not plead for my position, nor did I attempt to explain that artificial intelligence models are useless if the underlying mechanical logic registers are miscalibrated. I opened my bottom desk drawer, retrieving an analog multimeter from 1993 that founder Harvey Kaplan had given me on my first day of employment, along with a worn leather notebook containing sensor threshold calculations. I tucked those personal relics alongside my framed wooden schematic, holding the smooth glass in my calloused hands slightly longer than necessary, then slipped everything quietly into my canvas tote bag like a sacred collection. Before we dive into the complete structural collapse of Justin's corporate empire, indulge me for 2 quick seconds. Only 4% of you watching this channel right now are actually subscribed. That means 96% of you are ghosting me, like Justin ghosted employee loyalty. I am pushing hard to reach 10,000 subscribers, my first major landmark, and it would mean the absolute world if you clicked that subscribe button right now. It is completely free, and unlike Justin's management style, it actually helps someone who works for a living. Now back to the industrial wreckage. Justin strutted past my cubicle while I was slowly zipping up my winter canvas jacket. He was holding a half-empty vanilla protein shake while speaking loudly into his wireless Bluetooth earpiece about vertical integration, disruptive paradigm shifts, agile pivots, and eliminating legacy drag. I honestly did not know what was more offensive, his meaningless corporate jargon or the sickening smell of synthetic vanilla, combined with unchecked executive hubris. He did not even bother to glance in my direction. He walked straight past me as if I were a piece of leftover office furniture, perhaps an ancient fax machine that facilities management had forgotten to haul away to the scrapyard. The only acknowledgement I received was a nod from Martha at the front reception desk. She gave me the tight-lipped, compassionate smile that seasoned administrative women reserve for estate liquidations, funeral services, and bankruptcy court hearings. I walked through the sprawling industrial complex slowly, taking my time as if saying goodbye to a dying relative. I strolled past the high-precision calibration bays, the heavy robotic assembly lines, and the old break room where the vending machine regularly ate pocket change but never destroyed human hope. Every single square foot of epoxy flooring held 3 decades of memories, and every memory stung like rubbing alcohol poured into a fresh paper cut. I remembered the long nights spent troubleshooting hydraulic valves during winter blizzards, the celebrations when we hit 500 consecutive days without an industrial accident, and the quiet pride of working alongside honest tradesmen who respected precision. What truly stung was the realization that the younger junior technicians did not even know who I was. One 20-something intern referred to me politely as Mr. Vance from building maintenance. I was 54 years old. I had personally designed the primary programmable logic controllers that kept the entire production floor operational. I had written the recursive safety code that prevented 40-ton robotic arms from twisting themselves into scrap metal during power surges. Yet in Justin's brave new corporate hierarchy, I was merely an overpriced line item on a severance report printed by someone who was born after high-speed dial-up internet. When I stepped outside into the parking lot, a cold, gray Ohio drizzle was falling from heavy, overcast skies. It felt as though the sky was spitting on my 31 years of dedication just for amusement. I sat inside my pickup truck for a long time, my calloused hands gripping the steering wheel, while the framed schematic rested quietly on the passenger seat beside me. I was not weeping, I was not even furious. I felt something far colder, vastly denser, and heavier like structural titanium cooling slowly inside a vacuum furnace. Because Justin had not simply terminated a senior automation engineer. He had just fired the only living person who understood where the digital foundations were buried. He had fired the sole architect of the proprietary automation suite he had just spent millions of corporate capital to implement. That software suite had an official title, Vidian Dynamics, and every single line of code belonged exclusively to me. As I drove down the interstate, the rain steadily tapping against my windshield, I reflected on the changing tide of modern corporate management. In the 1990s, leaders built companies on craftsmanship, mechanical reliability, and structural safety. Today, young executives like Justin focused entirely on short-term valuation bumps, digital slide decks, and quarterly stock exits. They treated long-serving employees as friction to be eliminated rather than the foundational pillars holding the company upright. But in engineering, physics does not care about corporate slide decks. Gravity, friction, and software logic do not bend to executive arrogance. The workshop behind my rural home did not smell like motor oil and damp cedar like a typical residential garage. It smelled like high-level industrial strategy, precision solder resin, cold rolled steel, and a faint, lingering hint of dried lavender from a small linen pouch my mother had tucked into my original iron toolbox 30 years ago. The workspace was utterly immaculate. Pegboard walls were lined with meticulously organized diagnostic meters, digital oscilloscopes, and hand tools, while technical binders were arranged chronologically by federal patent application. While Justin was likely spending his weekends sipping expensive matcha lattes and browsing crypto investment blogs, I sat at my polished steel work table and opened a locked steel cabinet drawer marked Vidian Dynamics. The heavy steel drawer glided open on ball-bearing slides with silent precision. Inside sat 7 bound black leather-bound binders containing structural schematics, source code repositories, and certified federal documentation. Vidian Dynamics was never a third-party corporate product. It was an advanced, self-optimizing modular automation framework I had engineered over 8 long years in this very garage. I had built it during nights and weekends using borrowed optical sensors, custom-printed circuit boards, and a second-hand 3-dimensional printer. The system was designed to retrofit aging manufacturing infrastructure, allowing legacy assembly lines to achieve modern precision without destroying factory walls or spending tens of millions on complete structural tear-outs. I had spent hundreds of rainy weekend hours inside this workshop testing early software iterations. I had constructed miniature physical testing rigs with small servo motors and optical gates, running thousands of stress tests to ensure the logic algorithms could handle mechanical surges without failing. I embedded recursive diagnostic subroutines that could detect mechanical drifting in real time, adjusting voltage inputs automatically. It was an elegant, highly sophisticated suite born of 3 decades of practical engineering wisdom, crafted with the patience of an artisan rather than the frantic haste of a venture-backed software startup. 8 years ago, when founder Harvey Kaplan was still running Apex Manufacturing with honor and integrity, I had offered him an exclusive licensing agreement for a symbolic $1 licensing transaction. Harvey had smiled warmly, patted my shoulder with a weathered hand, and admitted he was 3 years away from retiring to a Florida beach chair and lacked the energy to spearhead a complex software revolution. He told me to keep the technology in my own name, warning me that future corporate leaders might not share his ethical values. Taking Harvey's advice to heart, I retained full personal ownership and filed federal patent protection for every core component, process matrix, and logic algorithm under United States Patent Number 10,812,944B2, accompanied by 6 supplementary federal patent filings. I had paid premium legal fees out of my own personal savings to a renowned boutique firm, Rosen, Vance & Bell, ensuring every patent application was an impenetrable fortress. I understood the corporate landscape far too well to leave my life's work exposed. Sooner or later, an arrogant executive like Justin Holcomb would attempt to seize proprietary technology without bothering to read the legal fine print. Under Title 17 of the United States Code, Section 106, the exclusive statutory rights to reproduce, distribute, perform, and license patented system software remain strictly with the designated inventor. Furthermore, Justin's sudden termination of senior technical personnel without proper statutory notice violated core provisions of Title 29 of the United States Code. Section 2101, commonly known as the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act. Under federal statutory framework, willful patent infringement under Section 271 of Title 35 of the United States Code carries severe civil liabilities, including treble damages and mandatory payment of attorney fees. In addition to statutory protections, Justin's reckless actions violated fundamental doctrines of commercial law. By installing unverified software baselines procured through unauthorized third-party brokers without verifying patent titles, Justin committed a direct breach of fiduciary duty to shareholders. Furthermore, by committing millions of dollars of corporate funds toward unlicensed intellectual property, he engaged in illegal dissipation of corporate assets. Under federal equity principles, any commercial contract executed under fraudulent misrepresentations regarding intellectual property ownership is rendered void ab initio, carrying zero legal force or enforceability. On the Monday following my dismissal, Justin hosted a grand corporate town hall meeting on the main factory floor. He rented production spotlights, hired professional audio technicians, and paced the elevated stage in his spotless white tech bro sneakers like a man who genuinely believed arrogance was an adequate substitute for technical competence. The oversized projector screen behind him flashed bold typography. Vidian Dynamics, the future of Apex manufacturing. I watched a live video stream recorded discreetly by a sympathetic former colleague. Justin announced to the assembled workforce that Apex was entering a fully optimized, artificial intelligence-enhanced era, boasting that he had modernized the entire enterprise by eliminating legacy drag. Justin then displayed a PowerPoint slide featuring my original hand-drawn paper schematics, side by side, with a glossy corporate flowchart. He chuckled condescendingly into his wireless headset microphone, mocking the paper blueprints as primitive relics of a bygone era that belonged in a museum. The crowd offered only nervous, muted chuckles. Sitting near the back of the room, senior technician Rachel Miller did not laugh. She recognized the architecture instantly. She knew that Justin was showcasing a system he had purchased through an unverified third-party vendor who had illicitly repackaged my early prototype code. Justin had just committed corporate asset waste, breach of fiduciary duty, and unauthorized intellectual property misappropriation. What Justin failed to comprehend was that I had programmed multi-layered protective safeguards into the core software. Without my personal master encryption key and manual calibration hardware, any unauthenticated attempt to alter factory logic parameters would cause Vidian Dynamics to isolate itself. The software would enter a silent protection loop, feeding recursive diagnostic data back to the interface, while freezing physical hardware in place to prevent structural damage. Justin was celebrating a modern triumph, totally unaware that he had just installed a digital vault whose only key rested inside my canvas tote bag. Sitting at my garage workbench late into the night, I reviewed the original notarized assignment documents from 8 years ago. Each document bore the official seal of the state notary public and certified signatures from boutique IP attorney Felix Vance at Rosen, Vance & Bell. The legal protections were completely ironclad. If Justin had simply conducted a 30-minute patent search before transferring millions to his third-party vendor, he would have seen my name registered as sole owner across all 7 patents. His refusal to perform basic due diligence was the ultimate undoing of his corporate career. By Tuesday afternoon, Justin's bold digital modernization plan began to unravel with catastrophic, breathtaking speed. The software rollout had commenced on line 3, where precision robotic welding units were assigned to assemble heavy structural chassis frames for commercial vehicles. At 11 o'clock in the morning, a subtle phase shift occurred within the core timing registers of the primary controller. Because Justin's integration team lacked my proprietary cryptographic hardware key, the embedded protective logic trees inside Vidian Dynamics automatically activated sandbox isolation safeguards. Instead of applying 3 reinforced spot welds along the load-bearing steel joints, the robotic welding torches operated in inverted sequence. Thermal plasma cutters sliced through 56 structural chassis frames like metallic guillotines. Each chassis frame contained $8,400 in high-grade structural steel and pre-machined mounting brackets. In under 50 minutes, over $470,000 of premium raw materials were transformed into twisted scrap metal. Bright blue sparks rained down onto the concrete floor, while emergency alarm buzzers shrieked across the assembly bay. The automated inventory tracking system collapsed immediately afterward. Wireless barcode scanners began misclassifying raw materials arriving at the loading docks. Pallets of high-density plastic molding resin were flagged by the corrupted database as high-voltage hazardous waste. The system automatically summoned an emergency hazardous containment contractor, routing 30 tons of usable raw materials to an off-site chemical disposal facility at double rush rates. When plant managers attempted to override the system's software manually, the control consoles displayed recursive error loops, locking administrative accounts out of the mainframe. On Wednesday morning, the chaos escalated further on line 4. The pneumatic pick-and-place robotic arms, responsible for installing delicate optical sensor packages onto transmission assemblies, began twitching violently mid-cycle. The uncalibrated timing controllers caused the suction grippers to release their cargo 3 feet above the conveyor belt. Over $28,000 of precision glass and quartz optical sensors shattered into dust against the concrete floor in less than 15 minutes. Line operators stood helpless, watching thousands of dollars of component inventory destroy itself, while Justin's digital dashboard flashed green status icons. Justin panicked completely. He gathered his engineering leads inside the main conference room, slamming his fist onto the glass table and screaming that the codebase was written in alien pseudo-script. The lead software integrator, sweating heavily through his dress shirt, stammered that the underlying logic was hyper-optimized, recursive, and modular, but contained zero documentation or version history. He admitted that the baseline software suite, for which Justin had authorized a corporate payment of $3.6 million to an outside vendor, was completely undebuggable without the original system architect. Justin immediately hired a team of outside technical consultants at $2,500 per head per day. They arrived in matching branded corporate polo shirts, carrying diagnostic laptops and expensive confusion. They spent 8 straight hours analyzing the server architecture, only to conclude their assessment by taking photos of the hardware racks and admitting that the system was mathematically hostile to unauthorized modification. The lead consultant explained in plain terms that Justin had purchased stolen, locked code that possessed active protection subroutines designed to shut down if tampered with by non-authenticated personnel. As news of the production disaster spread throughout the corporate office, key logistics partners began calling Justin's direct line. Main freight carriers reported that truck loading bays were backed up for miles along the highway as automated cranes refused to release container locks. Penalty clauses in commercial supply agreements began ticking automatically. Every 60 minutes that the facility remained paralyzed added $15,000 in breach of contract penalties. Justin's face grew pale as he watched real-time financial tracking dashboards turn deep crimson. Meanwhile, factory floor morale plummeted to historical lows. 3 experienced department managers submitted immediate resignations rather than endure Justin's verbal abuse and chaotic corporate mandates. Workers on the assembly lines began referring to Vidian dynamics as the virus. Line operators stood motionless beside dormant conveyor belts while penalty fees for delayed client shipments accumulated at a devastating rate. Justin's grand modernization project had transformed a highly profitable manufacturing plant into an expensive, paralyzed graveyard of malfunctioning robotics. By Wednesday evening, the factory floor was filled with eerie silence, punctuated only by the intermittent beeping of diagnostic error codes. Supervisors sat in the break room sipping stale coffee, while Justin paced frantically inside his glass office, screaming into his headset at vendor representatives who had suddenly stopped answering his calls. The corporate facade of disruptive modernization had completely shattered, exposing the total vulnerability of a leadership team that had chosen hubris over technical reality. While Apex Manufacturing was bleeding operational capital on a massive scale, I was enjoying the tranquil rhythm of unbothered forced retirement. On Thursday morning, I attended my second pottery class at the local community center, taught by an eccentric instructor named Clara Vance. Sitting at a spinning potter's wheel, I shaped raw gray clay into heavy ceramic vessels. Clara spoke gently about letting the clay find its emotional harmony and spiritual balance. I focused entirely on structural integrity, wall thickness, and load distribution. My ceramic bowls did not possess spiritual energy, they possessed precise engineering tolerances. In the afternoons, I spent hours inside my garage workshop, restoring an old 1975 metalworking lathe machine I had acquired years ago. I wiped down the cast iron bedways, lubricated the lead screws, and calibrated the spindle bearings. Listening to classic rock radio while working with my hands gave me a sense of profound peace I had not felt in years. For 31 years, I had carried the stress of maintaining a multi-million-dollar corporate infrastructure. Now, I was completely unburdened, watching Justin's house of cards crumble under the weight of its own legal and technical arrogance. My mobile phone buzzed twice every afternoon with detailed text updates from Rachel Miller. Her messages read like field dispatches from an active corporate war zone. Line 2 had just crushed $45,000 of rush inventory after a servo motor seized up. Justin had thrown a glass water pitcher against a whiteboard during an emergency executive briefing. External auditors from major client accounts were demanding emergency facility inspections. I read the text messages calmly, took a slow sip of hot chamomile tea, and returned to pruning lavender bushes in my backyard garden. On Friday evening, as the sun began to dip behind the oak trees, in my yard my landline phone rang. It was Gordon Bennett, Vice President of Operations at Apex Manufacturing. Gordon was a veteran logistics manager who wore steel-toed work boots, drank bitter black coffee, and understood the exact mechanical stress required to shear a grade 8 steel bolt. He was one of the few executives remaining at the company whom I genuinely respected for his work ethic and technical honesty. Gordon spoke with heavy, exhausted breath. He confessed that the plant was facing complete operational collapse. Systems were locking down, production schedules were destroyed, and major clients were threatening immediate contract cancellation. He described how Justin was sweating profusely inside board meetings, pleading with senior directors to find a solution. Gordon begged me to return as a high-paid emergency consultant to restore the baseline software architecture, offering $500 per hour. I listened quietly to Gordon's plea, leaning against my kitchen counter while watching a gray squirrel attempt to raid my bird feeder outside. I informed Gordon politely that my consulting fee would require liquidating Justin's executive stock options and severance packages. I explained that operating proprietary software without valid federal licensing constituted a direct breach of fiduciary duty and illegal dissipation of corporate assets under federal corporate statutes. I told him that legal invalidity under void ab initio doctrines could not be patched over by a weekend consulting visit. I wished him well and hung up the telephone gently. That night at 9 o'clock, night shift supervisor Brian Miller executed a routine diagnostic reset on line 1 in a desperate attempt to restore conveyor power. The central server terminal froze instantly, displayed a solid blue background, and flashed bold white text across every workstation screen in the facility. Vidian Dynamics, system lockdown initiated. Error code 105 alpha, federal license validation failed. System authority null. The automatic security protocols executed their final instruction. Circuit breakers tripped in sequence, shutting off secondary power feeds to the assembly bays. Workstation monitors went dark one by one, leaving only emergency exit signs glowing dimly in the dark. The entire production floor went completely silent, bringing 3 decades of industrial manufacturing to a total unyielding halt. In the dark administrative offices above the floor, Justin stood staring at his dark computer screen. The silence of the factory floor was far more terrifying than the roar of machinery. For the first time since taking office, Justin realized that no amount of corporate buzzwords, PowerPoint slides, or executive posturing could restart a plant whose digital soul had been legally and technically reclaimed by its rightful owner. The final legal reckoning arrived on Monday morning in a thick, embossed linen envelope delivered directly to Justin's executive suite by a formal courier from Rosen, Vance, and Bell. The courier walked past Justin's executive assistant, without pausing, placing the heavy legal binder directly onto Justin's polished glass desk. Inside were 10 pages of meticulous legal analysis, citing federal patent infringement under Section 271 of Title 35 of the United States Code. The document declared that Apex Manufacturing was operating 7 patented software modules without authorization, demanding an immediate cease and desist of all factory operations. The legal notice outlined non-negotiable terms: an immediate total shutdown of all automated assembly lines, a full retraction of Justin's town hall statements, a formal public apology printed in Industry Week and local business journals acknowledging my sole authorship, and a one-time licensing settlement fee of $44.5 million. Furthermore, because Justin had procured stolen baseline code through an unauthorized vendor, all corporate contracts associated with the implementation were declared void ab initio under federal commercial law. Justin sat frozen in his leather chair, reading the patent registration numbers line by line. Across each page was the unambiguous name: Brandon Vance, sole inventor and patent holder. Attached were certified mail receipts, original schematic filings, and cryptographic hash verification proving that every line of Vidian Dynamics belonged exclusively to me. The legal firm warned that willful infringement would trigger treble damages, personal executive liability, and immediate federal injunctions. The news broke across regional financial media that afternoon. Articles highlighted Justin's spectacular failure, citing executive hubris, lack of technical auditing, and blatant intellectual property theft as the primary causes of Apex Manufacturing's collapse. Major client Peterson Industrial formally terminated their $50 million annual supply agreement, while Silicon Valley venture funds demanded the immediate return of $4.8 million in modernization capital. Faced with mounting lawsuits, massive financial penalties, and personal liability for corporate asset dissipation, the board of directors convened an emergency session. They voted unanimously to strip Justin Holcomb of his executive title, stock options, and severance package. The board authorized legal action against Justin personally for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. He was escorted out of the building by security guards, clutching a solitary cardboard box containing his white sneakers and an empty protein shaker. 3 weeks later, Apex Manufacturing's physical assets were put up for liquidation auction by bankruptcy trustees. Utilizing the capital accumulated from my previous engineering ventures and personal investments, I purchased the plant's core machinery, real estate, and facilities for pennies on the dollar. I re-established the facility under the banner of Vidian Automation Systems, rehiring Rachel Miller, Martha, and my entire former technical team with elevated salaries, comprehensive healthcare benefits, and profit-sharing equity. I walked back onto the main factory floor on a bright Monday morning, not as an employee being ushered out, but as the sole owner and chief executive officer. I gathered our former technicians on the floor, handing each worker a permanent employment contract with full health coverage and profit sharing. I stepped up to the main console of Line 1, plugged in my cryptographic hardware master key, and pressed the primary green start button. The plant purged the third-party vendor code instantly, recalibrated the optical sensors, and came back to life with flawless, self-optimizing precision. Today, the factory floor hums with flawless, self-optimizing precision, producing advanced modular components for aerospace and medical industries across North America. Rachel Miller serves as Vice President of Operations, while Martha manages communications. Our facility stands as a beacon of modern industrial excellence built on respect for skilled tradesmen and sound engineering principles. Justin Holcomb spent his remaining personal savings defending himself against shareholder lawsuits and federal regulatory inquiries, a living testament to the danger of mistaking veteran engineering experience for legacy drag. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge.